So the first is review of a draft local law revising the zoning of the RZ on Hudson train stations.
Okay. So we have a draft of the local law, which I know you've seen by email. I can pass out a copy. It's the August 31st one, right? Okay.
This is what is in the back. Right?
Oh, we left it in the back, yeah, so just in case, but there you go. Not that it's a public hearing, but, yep. All right.
Wasn't John Michael or whatever his name?
Yeah, I spoke with him, I think so, but,
Oh, okay.
He had some suggestions, right?
I don't know that he did. No, what we got in the mail, what we got today, we came from Nicholas Moore. But he wasn't, he called me today, and he said he had seen the law, but if this is what he's working from, he wasn't working from the draft at all.
no, he had a copy of the, the draft local
So I
law.
don't know why he marked, what's marked up here is.
That's how APOA chose to deal with it, as far as I can tell.
Okay.
I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know, but,
So this is an older version?
no, this is the regulation for the Irvington train station. That's all he marked that one up.
APOA marked it up.
Yeah.
It was
Yeah,
attached to this,
yeah.
it was part of his email, right, yeah.
And, you know, I looked through his comments and, actually ours, the only, one that you might want to discuss is his A there. Including, and one thing he told, well, it was in his letter, he did telephone me today and said that the use that they had in mind, I guess, would be an architect upstairs and downstairs a coffee shop run by Mercy, and that would be like a Mercy welcome center or something. I don't know.
Did we hear about that separately from that letter? Or that's the first time we heard that Mercy was possibly involved?
From Nicholas Moore. I didn't.
No, I thought they mentioned that.
I thought it was mentioned,
They
yeah.
mentioned Mercy might want to have a role in it or something like that. When John Michael was talking about it,
Oh,
I think it was still theoretical. But
Right.
Yeah.
But a coffee shop was something important.
yeah, it might be like
Snack shops, get the coffee.
Within they might sell, Mercy Mavericks T-shirts there or something like that. That was kind of the.
But then I would just leave retail stores the way it is. He says including food and beverages, but you don't need to do that because right now, see, what happens when you define things more narrowly, then that would mean that the retail stores down in the business district can't sell food and beverage unless you say it, so you just say retail stores.
Right.
And I do think that the size of the building we're talking about limits a lot of. I mean, it's not going to be a Home Depot.
Yeah.
Yes, do we have,
Lumberyard.
So then really the only other specific suggestions are to take out banks and theaters.
Well, the theaters are already out. There's no
Oh, right, we
nine
took
by
out,
draft.
sorry, we took
We
out,
didn't take out banks.
we didn't.
No. Now, I can see why you marked.
I think we asked, and he
Well,
said,
no,
you
it's
never
on
know.
his draft.
But John Michael, he said, what about banks? He said, you never know. I think
He could have an ATM or whatever. I don't see any issue. I mean, the chances are you're not gonna have any big banking operation. No bank's gonna
And
want
if
to
it
go
wasn't
there except.
private banking.
I mean, their comment is too commercially intensive, right?
Yeah.
well, if you had the floor space. I mean, you could have an ATM, but you most likely would not have anything from a commercial bank. You'd have one
Yeah.
of those rip-off ATMs that plug in the wall
It's
and
about
take
$7.
Bitcoins, yeah.
Bitcoins.
Larry and I were just talking about that.
We've invested all the village funds in Bitcoin.
Well, until Jamie Diamond screwed up.
Yeah.
Is there any distinction between full-service banks and other banks? Are there different types of descriptive? Oh, hi.
Wait. Mark's asking
Oh,
a different
sorry.
question from you. Let's resolve his.
Oh, yeah, I was just saying, in terms of retail, we don't want, what do you call it, franchise type stuff, right? we need to say that?
Yeah, it already says it, go to the next page. The following uses shall be prohibited.
Okay, I
The
just,
use of premises for the operation of any formula fast food establishment or any restaurant or food service business providing curb or drive-through service. That was it, and then the formula fast food establishment thing was defined as,
elsewhere.
Yeah.
That's
so
all right.
that's here.
I can't read ahead, so I'm sorry.
So that's in here. I mean, I guess he should know, he should know, I guess, that, if I recall, our definition of would have probably included a Starbucks. I don't hear about formula in here. And right now, the coffee shop that they have at Mercy is a Starbucks. So, you should know that. I mean, if Mercy wants to have its own coffee shop.
And proudly serve Starbucks coffee there.
So, restaurants,
That's right.
is that the other questionable one?
Yeah, parking is the question.
Well, he's got that in-unit parking's available to him to the side, so I'm not sure that I see why there's a parking.
Yeah, I thought we talked a little bit about that and said that if it's gonna be a restaurant, it'd probably be in the evening. In the evening, you know, where there'd be parking. It's not such a bad, remember, it's gotta be by special permit, and they would have to show that they have the parking for it.
There's no way they're gonna do it if there's an architect, they would have to have the whole building to be a restaurant, I think. They
Well,
would be big enough.
Yeah, or you could have, although maybe it would be retail. I know in Mount Kisco, they had this really nice, this thing, Flying Pig restaurant, and it just had a few tables, but it had food that you could take home, you know, you bring home dinner.
Yeah,
It's a nice idea.
And the other thing I was mentioning was like, was it JJ Beans or JR Beans, or whatever it is in Dobbs, which they serve food, but it's all prepared off premises and brought in. And then they kind of, it's just all reheat type of
Is the
stuff.
train station
No,
there?
no, on,
Oh, the street,
Cedar.
yeah. Yeah. Oh, well, they have a restaurant in Dobbs, in the Dobbs
It's a
Ferry
big,
train
it's a pretty
station.
big building.
Yeah.
And I have it upstairs as well.
Yeah, but chances are, I mean, yeah, but maybe the architect's not gonna be upstairs.
No, I'm not.
You know, yeah, all I'm suggesting, maybe the architect won't be upstairs and in the future it could be.
I think the point is we don't want to unnecessarily limit. And
Yeah.
at this point, if it's an architect upstairs, it's going to fit a coffee, but there's potentially a possibility in the future where the whole building would be empty and somebody
Yeah.
would want to open a restaurant, and it's easy enough to do that. There would be parking because there's all those metered parkings and whatever.
plus there's his parking area if he builds it out,
Yeah,
the gravel area, whatever it's gonna be.
So I would be in favor of leaving restaurants in.
Okay.
He's here. He's here.
With the lot that I have to actually build that. That's a requirement with the MTA, so I have to build that lot. That's not a question of whether it's gonna be done or not.
This is the parking area you were
Yeah,
talking
parking
about
area.
last time,
Yeah, they gave me a time frame that I have to build that.
but with a surface that is
Removable, yeah.
removable.
Yeah.
You know what?
Easily removable.
I just have a thought on that. You know how it says that the planning board has to be sitting in 3A? That the planning board shall require no special permit be issued until the planning board is satisfied with the proposed use will satisfy the off-street parking requirement for such use. But there is no parking requirement for restaurants, because this was taken from downtown. And downtown doesn't have the parking requirement for restaurants. So if this is left the way it is, if the applicant wants to come in and put in a restaurant that's there, that would have like a big lunch restaurant, the planning board can't take the position that you're not satisfying the off-street parking requirement the way this is met, because there is no off-street parking. But this could be worded differently so that the planning board determines if there's adequate parking for the use.
Yeah, that's,
That might make more sense.
that makes a lot of sense because each use is gonna be so specific.
Okay, I like that.
Otherwise, you're gonna have to put in,
Well, some of the others have, you know, have them. I don't think that's bad to leave it in. But the thing is,
medical dental. Where did we say medical dental elsewhere? Sorry, in a list of exceptions.
business administrative or professional offices.
Okay, thank you.
I would suggest changing 3A3 to, if the planning board finds that, there'll be adequate, or something along the lines that the planning board determines that there's adequate parking.
I wouldn't have even
Give it more
thought
leeway.
of that.
Pardon?
I wouldn't have even known if you hadn't brought it up about the way that the business district describes doesn't have an off-street parking. So I'm glad you brought it up because you
Yeah.
know those things so well.
Yeah.
Do we really want to allow a buyout of parking space? Is that useful in this context? Sorry,
Yeah, I mean, there was,
I know that's a area, but what is that? That's 3C1, no, 3C3A.
yeah,
I mean, I could see B still putting it with it. To me, this plays into the idea, against the idea that, we should make sure that the use in that area doesn't create excessive parking. And if you have a buyout, then you can't use an argument.
yeah.
We did that.
You wanna take it
I
out?
don't think it's applicable anyway because it's
Yeah,
going to
no.
that lot. So.
Yeah. But I just think there's
Yeah.
And on
And
page
you,
3, Jim,
Just
the
hang up for you.
3A, and then I'll get you rework that. I'll just put, move B up the, under 1.
Just what they didn't object to it here, which is interesting.
Yeah, well, it may have lost track reading.
Didn't get that far.
Can I go back to my question?
Oh, yeah, I'm sorry, Connie.
All right, there are
That's
two
fine,
things.
Lynn.
All right, one was, is there any distinction between a full-service bank and this kind of limited, it's not just an ATM, but it has, no. So it's either a bank or it's not a bank. Is that,
Yeah, I mean, generally, in code, you don't define things so finely, I mean, once in a while you do.
But you can't, I mean, it's difficult to imagine that somebody's gonna move in a loan officer and a, IRA counselor.
Yeah.
so are we thinking of leaving in banks? Because the only way a bank would actually go in there would be, it would be so limited that it wouldn't be a very
Well,
big
No,
operation.
I don't know, I mean, we leave it in because it's not shared use.
Okay, can I ask a
Right.
question?
It's
Right.
quiet use.
We would want it,
Even though it's, in and out, but if it's,
So a
if it's so
retail
small.
store.
Yeah, right. Okay,
And I would hate to say anything like bank, but small bank, I mean, you're gonna say retail store, but it's small retail.
I thought I was trying to distinguish if there were two categories of banks that I'd never heard of.
fail,
that
and
one-
too big to fail.
Too big to fail. Sorry.
That was good.
All right,
And
and
the size of the building defines.
defines a lot of the use. Now, I have one other question about the
Before-
Starbucks.
Okay, before we get up to
Yeah.
bank, can I just ask, we really don't want drive-through ATMs though. So where do we disallow that? We disallow drive-through restaurants or curb service restaurants. We would like a walk-up ATM with a window, it's not a bad thing if it doesn't create a problem with the architecture. I mean, that could be useful.
Make sure it's through banks, but not any drive up.
Yeah,
Banks, like, whatever you-
we don't want to have drive-through services, so maybe that could be just
How would you drive?
a generalized,
How you drive through?
no drive-through or drive-up
With the lobby.
services,
Into the lobby.
Does that make sense?
I could do that, let me just ask you, by saying that, all right, by putting it here, it would recognize that banks elsewhere in the village, which I guess is just a business district, could have drive-through services, and I guess they do, right? Sunnyside, so, okay,
Chase
Okay.
doesn't, 'cause there's no.
yeah.
Well, I'm wondering if it should be more general, just hear me out for a second, and then we'll get back to Connie's Starbucks. Should it just be a prohibition against drive-up or drive-through services, period, in any form?
So do it under 2B.
Do you see what I mean, so that you can't, I mean, I know you
Well,
say,
to be, that's, Oh, I see, the following use shall be prohibited.
Use of
You could
premises.
say
or
any business providing curb or
Yeah.
drive-through service.
To me, that would be more general, then you wouldn't get this, because even now we're talking about potentially outlets and pickup stations for laundry, blah, 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 blah. So we don't really want it to be a 5-minute, 15-minute parking spot, drive up, pick up your stuff and leave. That's different than, you know,
Line back up to-
right, like to a window.
With people trying to get to the train with people lined up to try to
Really?
get on and.
So we don't want service windows, I guess is what we're talking about, in general.
Not that I can picture one, but someone might be able to, yeah.
Okay,
Like maybe right in the front. Who knows?
but the point Janice, I think, is making is the dropping off and stopping.
Yeah, that's the
and
general.
it sounds like a little bit of chaos, right?
Yeah, plus we don't want excessive modification to the exterior of the
Oh,
building.
yeah, absolutely.
Well,
Can't happen anyway.
can't have any. Well, and the way this does not say excessive modification, doesn't, I would say the way it reads now will preserve the exterior of the former train station.
So
There's not much you could do. I mean,
can we put,
this is different language than the language from,
what about exterior signs, allowed or not allowed? Is all sign, you know, like under the awning?
we have signs, but only in accordance with Article 29, whatever
Yeah,
the
so they
sign
could have
code
a
is.
sign on the eaves, that because it's gonna be like they have those deep eaves.
Okay, and we made that provision that you could,
Yeah.
we changed it. I mean, if it, we haven't passed those yet, have we?
It's on Monday.
Could I just ask a question? Sorry, I'm here from Alcoa, and the one thing they were concerned about was the signs, making sure that there wasn't like a neon sign.
Neon
along the
signs
sign.
aren't allowed right now, they have to be naturally lit, right? If I remember correctly, we don't allow neon signs, except maybe as,
I don't think so. I think neon's allowed.
oh,
If it's not flashing,
blinking.
No
it's
flashing
not
lights.
allowed. Neon is allowed.
ARB, there's some context approval through ARB that has to be appropriate for the building and the neighborhood.
I don't get the sign code.
Yeah.
So signage is a concern and an issue. I mean, it was in this letter, and
Right.
we've considered that signage in general in the village is always an issue, so I guess we just, I don't know how we put it in here or don't put it in here,
But
or
it's-
say that the same signage law
But
follows.
if there's going to be businesses that
Yeah.
are going to be patronized by members of the public, they have to be able to say who they're
What it
there.
is.
There has to be, so the question I think is whether the village signage code is adequate for this setting, where there have to be signs, it's just a question of what kind of signs.
Right.
So the question is whether or not, because the kinds of signs, there was some very specific wording about the neon signs or the backlit signs. Because obviously Chase, it's allowed for Chase signs on Main Street. Chase Bank signs are backlit, but they're not open neon. The only open neon I know of is the bar,
You know, the grill on Broadway.
Broadway Grill. And that was sort of grandfathered, I thought.
Well, I think we talked
But I think we
about
talked
it.
about like the open signs that are really.
Yeah, I know we talked about it, because I remember saying that you can actually have elegant neon signs. I'm not saying this is appropriate for it, but in our sign code, you can't.
As long as it goes through ARB review for appropriateness, then it seems like we're covered, I would think. Because they would be really concerned about protecting the historic nature of that building.
Yeah, I mean, one other thing you could say, because this is a historic building that's not in the historic district, you could make the guidelines apply for it. The design guide. Do you see any issue with that, Larry?
But the guidelines are guidelines. I mean,
The
we
design
said
guide, yeah, I know, but right now, isn't it just a design guide for the historic district?
Right, doesn't
And this
apply
isn't in the
for us.
historic district, so you could, say something about,
Designated as historic district island? No,
Well,
or
we
some
say
sort of
that-
an overlay, you know?
But the point, of course, the problem is that you can't say we'll preserve the exterior of the former train station, except any changes should adhere to the design guide, when this is suggesting there shouldn't be changes.
At all.
So, well, I mean, you could, there's no reason you couldn't specify here, it says size, but only in accordance with Article 29 of this chapter, and, you know, signs that are consistent with the, you know, historic character.
This is the historic
The
character
building.
building and the residential
Neighborhood.
I
neighborhood.
was kind of thinking, it's residential, that's the big difference.
Right, because you don't want to be looking out of the windows of Hudson House and seeing, you know, coffee.
Well, we know that on Main Street, the people that don't like the manicure, pedicure sign.
Yeah, but that's a little different, that shows to live in the Main Street area.
Main Street.
Is that building designated, by the way?
It doesn't, it doesn't have historic landmarks.
Okay.
No, it does not. It doesn't.
The owner can apply for that. Okay, now, I have a question
The
about
owner's next on the
Starbucks.
way.
Yeah. So, just imagine this scenario that Mercy, as I've never been there, but I understand they have a Starbucks
Right.
on their main campus. And if they were wanting to use the train station as kind of a sub-place where they bring in things from the Starbucks and bring them in there in small amounts, kind of like you said, like I think J.J. Bean does. Would there be a reason why they couldn't do that? That the signage wouldn't be, I mean, it wouldn't be the same as a fast food formula newly opened place. It would, but it would use those products. So you think it should be not allowed because it.
It's not what I say,
No, I'm not saying
I
you-
don't care.
But
I mean,
I'm just
whatever
saying,
whatever you guys want, but the
Yeah.
way the code reads now, the village, in any of its business districts or business buildings, doesn't allow formula fast food establishments, and which Starbucks is. So,
We heard fairly loud and clear that people are not loving Starbucks on Main Street or any place else, so.
this is a little different. If the relationship is with Mercy, and that's what they already have, I don't know how that would
Well,
be so negatively.
John Michael, maybe you know, do you know that whether Mercy planned on just having its own coffee shop, or were they gonna make this a Starbucks branch?
I think they were gonna have either own or they were gonna look for like an outside vendor to sell this
Okay.
to.
Well,
Alright, so
maybe
just
it's not
leave
an
it
issue.
the way it
All
is,
right.
yeah.
Yeah.
But if that was the deal breaker, I would think that that would be a sad to leave it out.
Not
It's
opposed
gonna
to
work for everybody and not offend anybody.
But
I mean, I wouldn't be opposed to a Starbucks in there that limit their signage, if they just
Well,
have a
that's
little
what I-
Starbucks seal at the window.
Yeah, and it's sometimes like you have, we proudly brew whatever type
Yeah.
of coffee, like Coffee Labs coffee, but it's not really a coffee.
Green Mountain Coffee.
Yeah.
Right.
But
Yeah,
it's not a
it
chain.
can be whatever brand, but that, it doesn't say you can't have that brand of stuff, but, I mean, but the thing is, that the ban of formula fast food establishments, you know, eliminated some things that might be, and we talked about that, some things that are actually quite Tony, you know, like, that, pardon?
Ponder, Le
Pan
Couturier.
Couturier, yeah.
So, I mean, I'm bringing it up in
Board
this
chose to do
context.
that.
So to think flexibly about this, and in this particular case, I'm just wondering
I
what
don't
the
think it'd
terrible
be big-
negative
I don't
would
think
be.
it would be big enough for a true Starbucks there, so.
So it would- right, it would-
Starbucks has their limitations, it's not big enough. I think if they had Starbucks coffee, I think it's very different than an actual Starbucks there,
Yes.
so. I don't think we have to worry about it myself, and if there is a problem, we can look at it.
I don't think it has the amount of traffic that they would.
Yeah.
To have
And
it-
I don't know
actual
how we
franchise.
have a limiting principle that we can have fast food establishments if they're Tony. I
No, I'm not suggesting that, but I'm saying, so that that did happen with the limit. You know, with the limitation on formula fast food.
I think it's an open question as to how that goes forward in the future, and this is just an example. So we're not changing it, it's not an issue, but, you know,
It could
no
become-
reason not to bring it up.
All right. Was that your
Yes,
question?
that
'Cause I
was
have
my two
another
things,
one.
the bank
If you
and
go on page 2, I really don't like this wording, but I do, the planning board should require that no permit be issued until the planning board is satisfied with the odd wording, but anyway. That the use will preserve the exterior of the former train station.
That no special permit will be issued until the planning board.
Well, you know what, Mark, I lifted, we're better off being consistent through the, I can think of a better way to word it, I can think of lots of better ways, but I think you're better off having the code be consistent, as long as it's not wrong. But it's that, we'll preserve the exterior of the former train station. With the Irvington train station, we had very specifically, except minor changes could be made, blah, blah, blah. And it actually was it turned out to be an exception that almost swallowed the
Yeah,
whole. It got to be, a real problem. So I don't think this reads that you couldn't change it at all. It says to preserve the exterior. If maybe they needed to, put in a second means of egress or needed to have events. And as long as it's done in a way that, that preserves it, preserves the exterior, I think it's.
It's a high standard, but
Yeah.
purposely a high standard.
Right. I think we learned from that exception that it could be problematic. In addition to which, it sounds like you can't do anything to the outside of the building anyway. Yeah. That's metro. So I think that's okay. And is everybody okay with the outdoor seating thing? Yeah. Okay. I don't know is there space there? All right, and then the other thing, go to the very end. I didn't put any restrictions, I didn't put any limits for yards, coverage, and height, because you can't do anything with it anyway, it's there. But if that building came down, of course, you know what, if that building came down, we have to redo the whole thing. Because this whole statute is written for that particular building. Yeah, so I think I just won't put that in there.
Unless you use the numbers from the existing building, you just plug them in.
Yeah, I know, I was thinking about that, but,
Well, it gives you a stop.
no, but then you have to figure out not just the size of the building, but the size of the lot and which part is the Metro North, you know what I mean? Which of it is Metro North property, I don't know what lot it is. Because coverage is that as a percentage of the entire piece that it's on, so. Easier than, harder to do than it seems. And then, the other thing I had on there, I had for the RZ on Hudson train station, is it okay to define it so specifically? I think it is, because we're just talking about this building. If that building comes down and something else goes up there and somebody's gonna have to then.
It does refer to the former railroad station.
Right, is that his formal name, RZ Hudson train station? Do you happen to know? What is your lease called?
I believe that's what it is, yeah. Yeah, that's what they call it.
The RZ Hudson train station?
Is that the part that was called Abbotsford? The original name of that neighborhood was called Abbotsford? Abbotsford? Is that I think it was. Anyway.
I should say
It
train
is
station
leased.
building, because you also have the platform. This doesn't extend to the platform.
Okay, that's good.
So we're done?
I don't know, I think somebody was here, I don't know,
Maybe Larry, you get a revised, well, once you get a revised copy, just get a copy to APOA and Hudson House.
I don't know if you saw a copy of the email from AKOA to us, but they praised you so highly for your community-minded vision, willing to reach out and work with them.
Just
It was
give him-
a pleasure.
There you go.
Oh, thank you.
Very
I
appreciative.
met them last night.
Yes.
Yeah, if people say nice things about you, you should know, so. Well, when things go down, I'm going to say.
All right, do you want it for this Monday's meeting, and I can make the changes?
Well, I think the plan was to announce,
Oh, announce a public
we're going
hearing.
to announce a public hearing. We usually put a draft on there, but if,
Yeah,
you
no,
know,
I'll have it.
but it's not 100% necessary. And then the public hearing would be on October 2nd.
Okay.
Review of comments received for the proposed downtown parking regulation revisions.
What's that supposed to mean?
This is
snicker?
not
A little
public
snicker.
discussion, right? We're just reviewing the comments.
Yeah.
Right, okay.
Time to discuss it on
I was just thinking we should probably just bring a horse and carriage back.
Okay. So what I'd like to do is go through the main items that were brought up at the meeting in August regarding parking, and talk a little bit about what could be done, what can't be done, or what should be done. So, and these aren't in any particular order, but they are maybe grouped a little bit together. There was a suggestion that the reduction of the hourly limits on the side streets from 6 hours down to 2 hours, there were a few objections to that. One of the objections related to the fact that by only allowing 6-hour parking on a relatively small number of streets, those streets would bear all of the burden of the commuters going to the city. Commuters, that is, the shorter day trip commuters, as opposed to the, full-time employees, presumably. And so I think that suggestion certainly warrants some further consideration, I would say. There was also some discussion about the 6-hour limits in relation to tradespeople working at people's homes, and having that be a 2-hour limit, not practical. There was a suggestion, I think, made on the board level that there was an exemption for tradespeople working at people's houses. I don't think that's the case, and it's not in the proposal. I think that came up in the context when you were talking, I think, in the comprehensive plan about prohibiting commercial vehicle parking. You were looking at other codes, similar codes of nearby communities that prohibit commercial vehicle parking, and at least one of the codes we looked at specifically had an exemption for tradespeople working at people's houses. Like that was where that came up. But that issue, if the board is, if we're interested in revisiting the 6-hour limit on the side streets, that issue essentially goes away. It goes back to where it is now, which is not an issue apparently.
And there was one other issue that came up with the lack of 6-hour parking, and that was the employee issue. For businesses that had more than 2 or 3 employees who couldn't get permits, they had a lot of problems with people having to go out every 2 hours to swap vehicles.
Right. So you did read ahead. No, I'm kidding. That was I grouped those few together, and that was one of them, because they're all related to the 6-hour limit, and frankly, I think if you revisit the idea, and we go back to the explanation of why we were looking at lowering the limits on the side streets, is we felt that if if all of the people who needed to park longer than 2 hours had a resident tag or an employer tag, then the parking, then those people would be unaffected by it, and the parking would turn over more quickly to make parking more available to the business district, the actual retail establishments. But I think some of the issues that were raised are significant enough concern that we probably should consider not changing the side streets from 6 to 2 and keeping it at 6. That solves a number of the issues here. I mean, you can probably slice it a little bit more and only say, from a certain street down, but I think there's probably enough.
So there's 6 now, and what we're suggesting is leave them at
6 on the side streets, yeah.
Right, which would also provide, that would then be an opportunity for the day troopers as well, because one of the concerns was balancing.
Well, they've always had that opportunity.
Right, okay.
Right. I mean, they do now.
Right.
Larry, are these changes that you're gonna want, that will make to the draft yet?
No.
No, okay.
No, I think what we would probably do is, if we're, I don't think I have copies of all that. Yeah. I think what we would do is discuss it here, get some, general approval of it, and then at the hearing on Monday night, when it's continued, we'll kind of bring people up to date on what the thinking is, and then take our time and revise. I'm not looking to dive into the regulations and get them right up to speed on all these different moving parts.
We're presenting the feedback, and we're trying to
see how we're going to respond to it.
Particular areas and get some idea if we have consensus among ourselves where we should go.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Are there some side streets that don't have 6-hour parking now?
There may be. I have a map upstairs that lays it all out, so we would.
Would we be creating, the question is.
We wouldn't change anything.
We'd be creating headaches there or what?
We would not change what's there on the side streets.
So what you're proposing?
We wouldn't change, if there happens to be a street, and it may be South Buckout that comes to mind, that has a shorter length of time for parking, that would stay the way it is.
South Buckout?
That comes to mind, but I don't have,
Faster, definitely.
maybe. Yeah, I don't have my map in front of me.
So could we revisit the reasons why we proposed 2 hours on the side streets?
Right,
Because
that
that
was
took
my-
a lot of, a year or two thinking, and we came up with 2 hours on the side streets had quite a few advantages. We're seeing some disadvantages, but don't we have to weigh that against the advantages?
Right. The main, well, there were 2 main advantages that I recall in our conversations. One was that there was consistency and ease of understanding of the regulations. That was one simple one. But the other one was to try to keep the parking turning over more rapidly than it may turn over now, so that parking would be available to the retail establishments in addition to the parking that's available on Main Street already. But I think the reality is that although there may be some spaces that would fall into that category that would turn over more quickly, the reality is that you're going to be ultimately giving people residential parking permits or employer parking permits for all of the people who are already parking there, and they're going to be able to stay all day, or 8 hours, or with no limit, so that the actual number of spaces that you're truly affecting by your lowering from 6 hour to 2 hours is probably a lot less than it's a lot less than the full, obviously, but.
Because if all the people who live there park their cars and park their
And
house
the employers
anyway,
and
it's
the-
not going to be.
Yeah. So I don't think it's as big of an advantage as it may have seemed, and I think that starts to weigh against some of the negative impacts that we heard.
All right, I'm not sure I'm there yet, but
Okay.
I'm thinking
That's fine. No, it's-
various points of view with that.
There was also a comment about the amount of parking that's available in the Field Point lot, and I think, because we were talking about allowing up to 10 permits for employer parking in that parking lot. And I think we have to circle back. The complaint was that there's not enough parking as it is, and you know, even though there are going to be some new spaces built there, we are taking spaces out of service on Broadway. It's a net gain, but I think we have to look at that more carefully and get better, more accurate counts on that. So
I think one of my questions I had when hearing that is, you know, really just how many of those spaces along Broadway are being used as customers coming in and out, and how many are being used as kind of employee parking? Because there's a lot of times I drive by there during the course of the day, the cars are not changing. There's certain spots where they do change, and I'm not talking about the Field Point parking, I'm talking about just along Broadway itself. There appears to be a certain area where people do in fact park in order to go run to, you know, the deli or to have lunch at the River City Grill, thank you. And, but there's also some cars that I know I've seen parked there for days on end, literally multiple days, especially as you get further away. Some of those spots that are being lost to Marker Ridge for traffic safety reasons. Those, from what I could see in the past, were not really were not being used by customers.
No, but the gentleman was from River City Grill was here at that meeting, and he explained that they've been using those. He's been trying to get his employees to park down there because it's a lot, you know, because it doesn't interfere with parking for people patronizing.
So you need employee parking.
Right, and that will be, you know, that's one business, but in point of fact, we are taking away, not related to this plan, but the obvious place to direct his employees to park, and it's not going to be there anymore.
right, but there'll be more spaces across the
We
street.
explained that.
Right, yeah. Okay, no, well, that has to be looked at, because I don't think the hourly limits on Broadway there are very long, so that's really, and it comes down to an enforcement issue, not a regulation issue.
You mean they're 1 or 2 hours?
Yeah, I don't think they're very long. I mean, I have to double check now, of course, but, so I have a note on that. I'll look at it. And then, one of the complaints that you heard, especially related to Greenfield Plumbing, was the limit that we had put on the number of tags per business. And that, just by way of history, that came about, you know, the original concept here was to provide the employees who are already parking on the street somewhere, probably in close proximity to where the businesses are, or where their business is, to provide them with a tag, but not just to park, that would give them the ability to park in their zone necessarily, but it could be in an adjacent zone where there may be more inventory than in the zone where the business is located. So that would give us the ability to kind of spread out the parking demand and on an overall basis, you know, improve the parking inventory where there's current deficits. So the theory of providing those employers with those tags was that they're already parking on the street, so you're not introducing a new element here. When we met with residents, the residents were in large part opposed to that idea, claiming that it would bring more, it would take spaces away from them on the street. And I don't think that's the relationship, but the compromise that we came up with was to limit the number of tags per business. But you know, that doesn't do anything to solve a business that has 14 employees, like you were told, you know, in August. And the reality is that those employees are already parking on the street in that general neighborhood, and it in large part it works. So, you know, my suggestion from the beginning was to either have a higher number of permits allowable per business, or if you want to keep more control over it, you have a somewhat higher number than 2, but, maybe 3 or 4, and then you have, an appeal process for people that need significantly more than that. And you consider it on a case-by-case basis. I don't know what the right answer is. I'm just saying those are the possible ways to deal with it.
Why would you need an appeal, though? I mean, if most people, are you assuming that businesses, I mean, the question is just that businesses take more parking permits than they need? So if they don't, if they just take what they need, then you really don't need an appeal process, right? You just then. But if you're afraid that they're going to stock up on parking permits, then you need to limit them and then have them come in and appeal. You see what I'm saying? It's like, are they good citizens or not? I guess that's the question.
Yeah, I mean, we can do what we can to verify, the number of employees or, their needs, but at the end of the day, we're not there working with them either, so.
Right, so I'm just wondering if the appeal process is just more overhead for not that much gain.
Right.
So the
Well,
original,
but I could see, Mark, a situation where somebody would, let's say you had a limit of 2, and you've got more employees, you have more employees than that, so, and they work on, maybe a place like Jordan where the kids work, they seem to work for shorter shifts, maybe because they're younger kids. If you had 2, you'd get the kids to switch the things around. If you could have more, maybe you would get more, and it would just be easier, and you wouldn't have to be, And I think the intention with the 2 was and not saying that this is going to employee B, it's going to the employer, and the employer would distribute them, in the way that works best for them. But if you can get 4, there's nothing dishonest about saying you need 4, but I do think it would make a difference. So I think that makes it, I think what Larry's suggesting makes sense. You put a limit and then say, it's not so much an appeal process, but,
Well, it is an appeal, you have to
it's an
make
appeal, yeah.
on your.
Well, appeal sounds
your
kind of formal,
request,
but yeah.
I mean, I don't know, because it just seems like a lot of these places, like Jordanes, they're lunch heavy and thin after that, like they have, how many people? Sometimes 8 people seems like behind the counter, plus whoever's in the kitchen doing prep work, probably earlier in the morning until mid-afternoon. And then, 6 to whatever, plus people behind the counter during lunchtime. And then down to more skeletal, a couple people behind the lunch counter after that. So, in a way, I'm not sure, I don't know if passing around the permit works or not.
And also, if we do change the side streets or here, such things to change, if we maintain the 6-hour parking on the side streets, that'll alleviate some of it as well, right? Because they can.
Well, an example like that would alleviate if
Yeah.
someone's coming in for a 4-hour shift at lunchtime. I mean, if that's, I don't know how they operate, but.
I don't know what their shifts are like either, but they seem like they don't have the full complement on the whole day. They really are lunch heavy, so they must do something with the hours, moving the hours around.
so my understanding was when we started talking about the tags for business, that they were exchangeable, that the employer got them and they could distribute them or hang them on a hook or something to get. But was that understood in the meeting, the prior meeting that I wasn't here, when the employers were discussing how many employees they had? Was there an understanding that they would, maybe the 14 employees are not all working at the same time?
Yeah, but-
Was there an understanding that the idea was to share them? Or was
The
it
limit was 2 or 3 for business, period. It didn't even matter. Like the Jordanes example, doesn't matter. 3 is not enough for their peak lunchtime employee load. I mean, it just doesn't
Yeah,
work.
but
Right, but that was
I don't know if they had
understand that
a
point, I
sense
just
of,
wondered if that was communicated. Or
I'm not sure.
No,
it's
but it
clear.
wouldn't help the plumber situation, because they all work like, 8 to 4 or whatever.
Wait, but it was never anticipated that this would solve everything. It was anticipated that this would push some of the employee parking from Midtown, uptown, downtown, to free up, hopefully, a few more spaces in Midtown for the business, people who are patronizing the businesses. I don't think you ever said, and I don't think it came up in the rather thinly populated meeting last time, that we were envisioning giving anybody 14 permits. You know, it was like, this is one way of trying to just redistribute the parking a little bit.
But I think the need, the desperate need for enough permits per business, for those excessive examples, a lot of that gets alleviated by not pushing the 2-hour limits on the side streets.
Agreed. And I think that
And he said, actually, that Joe Clark in his letter to you said that.
Right.
In fact, he even suggested 4 hours, but I mean,
4 hours everywhere then.
I know, yeah. But that doesn't help us for the city, though, so. So, anyway, there's an interrelationship between that hourly limit thing on the side streets and then the need for more employee parking tags. My sense is that if you allow for a couple of more than 2, maybe 4 permits per business on a maximum level, and then you allow for whatever the word is, maybe not appeal, but whatever,
Review.
hardship review or whatever, you allow for more to be issued at the discretion of the clerk, let's say, then that should allow you to respond to almost any situation.
And that would still maintain, in your current thinking, would still maintain the uptown, downtown, midtown designation on those employee tags.
Yes.
You would, right. Okay.
Yeah, I think it would have less impact than
But once
originally.
there's 6 hours on the side streets, if that is the.
They may still want to park there and deal with moving the car once. That's
Yeah,
possible.
that's what I was thinking, at some point it almost becomes, once you go to 6 hours, it almost becomes a moot
Yeah,
point.
I don't know how
if
much
the business-
anything changes.
If you can't force,
We're back to where we were.
if you're not getting the benefit of pushing parking up or down the hill, then I'm not sure where I mean, it makes it where it could be. Someone doesn't have to go out to move it at halfway through their shift.
Right.
Or 3/4 of the way through their shift. But beyond that. Because to me, even if I had a permit, I might say, heck, I'm just gonna park here because here's a 6-hour slot and it's closer to business. I mean,
Yeah, but none of these are perfect, but this has at least one way of trying to push the parking for some employees to places where it would be a bit more convenient. All of this is slicing and dicing. There's nothing we're gonna do that everybody loves. There's nothing we're gonna do
I don't
that.
even think it's functional though. That's what I'm trying to
No,
say.
but I think it at least has potentially can be, help alleviate the midtown parking problem.
I would say it is potentially helpful if, once the scheme and signage is clear, that there is enforcement. I mean, if it's.
We've said that all
If
along.
it's 6 hours, but you have an 8-hour shift, then you gotta get, a ticket.
Right.
Otherwise,
Yeah, no, enforcement is key.
right,
Right.
so all of this, I mean, that was also what we talked about for 2 years or so, that it's very unclear, the signage, and it's very confusing. It's, 2 here, 6 here, 1 here, 15 here, that in order to have enforcement, you needed some clarity. So sign clarity, communication of the rules, and then the, careful and systematic enforcement. I think that's the only thing that's, I think, is gonna make a difference in the long run.
I just don't
Larry,
think-
were there other issues that you had from the last meeting?
There was one more, yeah, and that was a question. It's not something we dealt with in our update, but the question was, why is overnight parking in Jaffrey Park not being considered to be allowed? It's not currently allowed, right? And the specific relationship that was presented to you was that the people that need to park overnight can only park on South Ferris Street up to the end of South Ferris Street where Jaffrey Park begins. And there are often overflow parking situations in Jaffrey Park, and they get resolved by people parking on South Ferris Street. So the suggestion was that you allow overnight parking on Jaffrey Park. So
Why not?
well,
What's the downside? It's
Yeah,
a wide
what's the
street.
you probably need to ask the people that live in Jaffrey Park.
I know, I'm just saying that,
Yeah, I'm
you know,
just
from
saying.
a safety, public safety perspective, it's a wide street.
Yeah, it's not, right,
So we really be more of what the neighborhood feels like.
exactly. So the question is, do you want to explore it further, or do you not want to explore it further?
No, I think we should.
Yeah, because it seems like it's the people, I'm guessing it's the people on Ferris Street who are suggesting it. Just to make sure that it's the, the Jaffrey folks aren't opposed to it. So.
And if they are, and why, if there is
Why,
opposition, we
yeah.
need to understand why, because we don't have that perspective.
Right.
Yeah.
I'm
We
sure
couldn't come up
nobody
with a
will
reason why
suffer,
people can't
nobody
park
will
overnight
suffer
almost
inside.
anywhere.
Well, but look, I mean, I think the prohibition throughout the village is that in some of the outlying areas, having cars parked all over the street is not what people want for their neighborhood. When everyone has driveways and garages and whatnot, they don't want cars on the street. That's been
It might turn out to be
the argument.
Jaffrey that are parking on Ferris would be happy to park in front of their house if they could. So.
That's what
I don't know. Yeah,
If there is that,
Larry, one of the questions.
it'll be mixed, I'm sure.
One of the questions that came up was, where do employees park? They just park the way everybody else does?
They do. Some move their cars, some park in the Aqueduct parking lot, like I do. I have no use for moving my car during the day, so I park up there. But it's a large combination. There's probably about 20 employees here at any given time, of which 8 or so, depending on the particular staffing, 8 or so would be the police department, but the remaining are the other offices, and it's a mix all around
So you mean 20 minus 8 is the number?
of administrative.
how do you park in the, you say you park in the Aqueduct or?
I have a daytime permit.
You have a daytime.
Yeah.
Do you know how many other employees have daytime permits for the Aqueduct lot?
It's a pretty small number, so I think the others move around. I don't know. Didn't interview everyone.
Tickets.
I think there's only 4 or 5 that park up in the Aqueduct.
That would be, I mean, I know this is, a gleam in everybody's eye, but if we could get that, that school lot down the street here, that would be perfect designated for employee parking.
It's not an educational use,
Recreational use.
and/or recreational.
Recreational
But
use.
the rec park's there, and you guys park in the rec.
So we'll put a swing set there
Yeah.
and a parking lot next to it.
Teach kids how to work on cars.
So of all this stuff, it seems all pretty sensible, except now I'm back to wondering about the business permit and what makes it make sense, and the 6 hours really pushes it to a limit of where,
How much influence do you have?
yeah,
Right. I agree. It's something we have to ponder a little
We could
bit.
try it, see if the behavior changes.
Yeah.
Go from there.
Wasn't
I think we have
there
to-
one of the letters
actually have more prefrontal capability than that.
from the Astor Street owner of the building that's going to be more commercialized? Wasn't that letter related to?
She was here also.
Well, okay, wanting 2-hour spots down there.
Yeah. Mhm.
Because it's kind of like Main Street.
Right.
Are
Is
they-
there consideration that Astor Street is a little different than the other side streets? If you're moving in the direction, or the consistency on the board is the idea of going back to 6 hours on the side streets. Does Astor Street also fit that category, or is it?
I don't think Astor Street is 6 hours right now as it is.
No, it's 2 hours.
Yeah, so I don't think we were planning on putting that at 6 hours. If we did, it was an oversight. I think the streets that we had looked at for 6 hour were essentially Bridge Street and North Buckout, and possibly the lower part of Main Street, but I can't remember that.
Yes,
Yes.
definitely the lower part.
Yeah, it
Because
was,
it is
yeah.
now.
So
We're
between
marking
Buckout and Astor, yeah, so, so I don't think there's an issue there. It might have just been a misunderstanding, but like I said, it could have gotten swallowed up in these regulations somehow too, so who knows? But the intention was that's an extension of Main Street. It's really the way it's viewed.
And Main Street was proposed to be 2 hours.
2 hours, yes.
Except for the 15-minute special spots.
Yeah. Right. That was good. That's, I mean, it's good feedback, so we'll,
What about the notion of using the library parking for residential permits? Is that booked up after hours? Is that booked up overnight, by residents in the building?
so I was a little unclear, because I listened to it afterwards, I was a little unclear as to whether the request was for the library parking lot or the parking in front of the library building.
Well, during the meeting, it
What
seemed,
Was it all of the
didn't
above?
we have some, there was something in writing about the library parking lot recently in the last couple of days, but,
Right.
but at the meeting, I think they were talking, my impression was the employee parking after hours. That's, that one strip of like 5 spots.
In front of the library.
In front of,
No, the front of the library is
employees
for,
are in the.
the employees are to the
In
side
the
of the library.
We have a small number of spaces that are parallel on the street, parallel to the library
Right,
parking
right,
lot.
right. That's-
Those are village employee parking lot
Okay, so they may
spaces.
be freed up at night, I think was the question.
One of the things.
Sure, yeah. For what, though? I'm not sure what benefit that would be.
Residential parking,
To park overnight?
yeah.
I mean, if you're gonna be having, if it's a question of how hard is it raining and how far do you wanna be from your house, but if there's a difficulty finding overnight parking,
Right.
why not?
But you'd have to leave.
You'd have to be out of there by 6:30, yeah.
Yeah, or 6:30?
Well, they start at 7, so.
What?
They're DPW employees that park there.
Oh,
Yeah, it's not library.
Yeah, so I'm not sure about the utility of
I thought you were
those.
talking about library employees.
Yeah,
No.
it's
Because the
confusing.
library employees are in the lot
Yeah,
itself.
they have the
So
parking
what
lot.
does happen to the front of the library lot at night?
Front of the library
No,
lot.
the
Those,
back, it's the housing parking.
Right.
For the
Nothing.
housing above the library. But the, I don't know,
nothing.
10 spots there, are they up there, could people park overnight in that? Why
Well,
not?
up to 7, you can park there and go into the city and see a play and come back, and it's legal, but there may be some I don't even know if it's signed for no parking after a certain
I
point.
don't think so. I don't remember the regulations for that lot, but
I don't
it's something we
remember
look
seeing
at. But it's but the goal here was to get more overnight parking for the people that live in the various apartments, or not so much townhome, but or condo, but the apartments on North Astor and Buckout and all that.
Right, so, I mean, we heard stories of people on Ecker particularly, who would say, they're driving and driving and driving, and there's absolutely no place to park when they are coming back from work. If you got desperate enough, could you go down to the library lot and park in those overnight? And then you'd have to leave by, 8 a.m. maybe?
But that's worth looking at.
Okay.
Anything- I think this
Anything
is,
that you can find.
any room we've got,
Right.
we should try.
I walk down there most nights, and those slots in front of the library are often only half filled or not filled at all.
Well, there's spots in front of the library on the street, but then there's also the parking lot itself
Parking lot
to the
itself,
side,
yeah.
which is half library, half housing, but, so there's a few different places to
That's
look.
right. So I
Okay.
think what we're trying to do is free up as much or be as creative as we can with where people can park overnight if need be.
Yeah, that's what my thinking there.
Okay.
I wasn't, these are the ones here are the DPW spots, right
In
here.
front, right, they're on this actual.
They're on the,
But
yeah.
the one that angled into the front of the library, what's the story on those overnight? That's fine?
That's what I said, I don't think they're restricted past 7 p.m.
Yeah, I'm
Yeah, I think that's
So-
just, right, that's my recollection, it's until 7 PM.
Well, I mean, if we made, part of the changes here are that overnight parking will be allowed in all of those locations, on-street locations. So I don't think I need to look into that, but what I need to look into is the library parking lot itself.
Right.
And Larry, remind me one last thing. Since we're talking about reusing all this parking, after hours, so to speak, the Astor Street lot, what happens after 7 p.m.?
We don't manage it, so I'm not sure. It's managed by Metro North.
We can't overlay residential parking permits down there or have,
Not unless we have a modification of the lease agreement that's in place. In other words, right now it's for Metro North use only, so unless they grant us an exception to,
Is there any, okay, so is there a way to find out, because a lot of the Metro North spots after 7 PM or whatever it is, 6 or 7 PM, you don't have to pay for parking, right? You just,
well, then it's probably the same.
but I don't know if overnight is allowed, that's why.
Yeah, I don't know their regulations, but that would apply to the entire Metro North parking lot down there as well. I mean, it would apply the same way.
When I lived on Master Street, I got a railroad parking passes parked there all the time.
Right. But you probably got that from the village,
Yeah.
back in the day, yeah, right.
Yeah,
Yep.
probably.
Well, there was discussion of that lot having empty spots after 2 or 3 or maybe 4 in the afternoon, and some discussion with Metro North might be a valuable discussion to have about being able to fill in once regular users of it have, statistically disappeared by a certain percent. Is that a conversation that we could have with Metro North?
I don't see why not.
I don't think they have a meter system there, for
No, it's a
pay.
permit, yeah, so you have a permit.
No, it's permit only, but.
Right, but then
and
it's
it's free on
statistically-
weekends and
Yeah,
holidays, but.
I'm just saying on
But I don't know about
days.
I'm thinking off-peak, like once you
Yeah.
get
It's
in
kind
the
of-
late afternoon.
If they say, we now know that there's at least a quarter of them empty after 3 o'clock in the afternoon.
Well, they probably know better than us, so.
Yes, right, we
What their
don't know.
capacities are, so.
And I know I'm segueing to the next item on the agenda, but certainly one of the things that the downtown subgroup of the Comprehensive Planning Committee suggested was setting up a mechanism where we could have ongoing discussions with Metro North. Where it's not just something where we try to get their attention about with something, but that where there's something where this is kind of built in. We need to have that.
I think that's very wise.
Easier said than done.
Customers are always right.
Comprehensive Plan Committee, review of comments received.
Oh,
We'll reconvene our larger committee. Scroll down here old
I think you're,
I don't think it's
It's
not very high, so.
hot, cold, you can move my jacket and umbrella over there.
My son turned this on just before I came over here, and he said the angle makes you all look really strange.
Oh.
Take that for what it's
You
worth.
should ask the camera.
I gave you all that.
I appreciate that. Yeah, they look pretty
How
good.
strange, just
Paid extra for that.
exactly how strange.
Not that strange.
It's all fish islands.
A little at an angle.
All right, I'm gonna read all the responses.
All right, so item number 45. Okay, so just by way of update, you should know that the comprehensive plan update document itself has been drafted. I've not circulated it. Marianne and I have spent a fair amount of time. Marianne spent a lot more time going through it than I have, but we spent a fair amount of time talking about it. And suffice it to say that I don't think it's ready for prime time, and I think there's a few reasons for that. So I didn't want to circulate it and then have you spend a lot of time on it and then have comments start coming in and, we're kind of in flux on it. So it was a little counterproductive to do that. So, but what's happened, since we first put together our timeline is that there's been a significant amount of feedback that's been received. And you know that, I sent it to you. I didn't obviously expect you to look through all of it, but some feedback's been received. We have a few other items that we still need to reach out on with to the community. I think it's been a little slow over the summer to gather that, but it's slowly being rolled out. And what I think really needs to happen, as Marion and I have talked about, is that you, as the Comprehensive Plan Committee, need to really spend time going through those comments. Take some time, as painful as it may seem, to look through them on your own. we need to come to a meeting or several meetings probably to really go through them, because you really can't finish updating this or finalizing this comprehensive plan update document until you know where you're going on some of these key issues. I think that makes sense, but it's not as though you got complete validation on every recommendation that was controversial. You certainly didn't. There might be one or two that are in pretty good shape. There's some general agreement there, but in large part you got some pretty interesting feedback. I think helpful in a lot of cases. Not so much, as I said in my emails when I circulated this feedback, it's not so much you can do statistically like a typical survey that would be done, but I think that there's a lot of good stuff that you can get from some of these comments, and you can see where people are coming from. So with that, I think we need to really, well, obviously, I'm not telling you what to do. These are our observations, but we need to come to a realization on where to go next with this. It's going to slow the process down considerably, but I think that you want to get to the right answer here. You don't want to rush something through just because you want to stay on schedule. You know what I mean? So, and I don't think I necessarily personally foresaw this going this way, but I think it's a healthy process, and you need to deal with it. pay attention to it. You know what I mean?
I thought there was some cogent comments.
I agree. Totally agree. Yeah, I mean, look, like anything, you go through things and you know pretty quickly which things are constructive and which ones are destructive, and you can weed those out. And but I think the ones that are coherent and constructive, you can work with, and you have to really start spending some time molding or not your recommendations. And anyway, that's the observation that we had. And if that's the case, I think we need to all look at our calendars and figure out meeting dates and when we can do this and how best to approach it.
Well, I'm also concerned. I mean, I read through a bunch of stuff, and my brain is kind of addled from it at this point because I did not have paper beside me to take notes. But we have to have a process that I'm almost going to throw this out, and then maybe it's not good, but maybe it is. Maybe a couple people should look at each one of those surveys and just pull the stuff out rather than having the pertinent stuff, because I think everyone's going to agree what the pertinent stuff is. I mean, there might be some bias, but
Mark, though, when I almost felt that you had to look at them as a whole. And Larry was trying to think of ways to summarize it. They don't summarize, And so one night I spent about an hour, and it didn't take a lot longer than that. It took an hour going through the Broadway ones. And you kind of have to read them all to get a feel for where people are at. And so maybe you could summarize. So many people said this, but maybe they said this to three, but it depends on what they did with one. Mark,
that's not what I meant by summary. I think what I meant is, like when I read through, I didn't read the Broadway one, but I read, like the Airbnb and B&B ones. There were, apart from just the absolute number of rejections, no way. I mean, there were very specific things about ideas for limiting or not, and then ideas for, I thought the most pertinent one that struck me was that, for instance, bed and breakfast should not be allowed anywhere except in business zone. So it's in a commercial zone, in other words, rather than in residential areas. So that would be that was actually to me, it was a pretty cogent one, because that would protect the character of the residential neighborhoods from excessive hotel-like density. It doesn't answer the Airbnb, but it certainly answers the...
Well, there's one thing, is I think the two have to be discussed totally separate.
Well, that's-
B&B is totally different from
I
Airbnb.
agree, and that's
Can I make a
important.
suggestion for the purposes of this discussion, however? I think if we get lost now debating B&B and
No,
Airbnb.
no, we're not, I'm not, Janice. That's not where I'm going.
Nope.
My suggestion was that we have one night where we discuss Airbnb, B&B, and the,
Use of
and-
historic
Borders
homes.
was brought
And
up,
the
and
use of-
it seemed to me that there was some misunderstanding among people, either in reading those questionnaires or in responding to them, the difference between Borders, Airbnb, and bed
and
and
B&B,
breakfast.
and then B&Bs, only because people are using the Airbnb sites for their parties to throw wedding receptions.
That got confusing there
that-
too.
Yeah, that,
There's definitely
that
some overlap, yeah.
those things be the discussion of one night. I'm not getting into the substance of it, but
Right.
one night we discuss those. And then the homework would be, you could read and
Yeah, that's
ju-
fine, that's
and
fine.
just read through the stuff. It doesn't take that long.
Yeah.
I agree. I
You
think
get
we
a-
have
you-
to read it. I think we have to see what people are saying.
Right, I
Because
get a
people make
feel
the same
for it.
point for different reasons, and we
Right.
really have to.
Yeah, just the
wrap ourselves
same
around
as
it.
if it were a public hearing and you were listening to these comments.
We asked people to give their
Right.
input, and everybody was responding. This was unlike a public meeting. They didn't listen to what the guy before them said, not that they necessarily do in public meetings either.
Right.
But so everybody
Right.
was just responding
Right.
individually, and we have to read them all.
I thought it was impressive, the number of responses.
So,
you know,
I
that-
was really
And the number of,
I think I read them all
Thoughtful
through,
ones.
although I didn't write things down and take notes either. But the interesting thing is, especially when somebody says yes to a proposal, what they say below is, but I want to do this, or I want to do
Right,
that.
you have to read the whole
Or
thing.
say no, but
Well,
then
then this
the
is-
concerns they have are things that could be told, like,
Could be
you
taken
could
care
go,
of.
like the garage.
Yes.
No, they shouldn't be because there'll be more cars on the street. But if you said you couldn't do it as a, so it's a whole thing. But anyway,
But I think it's doable if, what my concern was just focus, to be able to focus on it, so it's doable if we like take one big one a night, or maybe two smaller ones, like, you know, the
Right.
chicken and the egg one plus something else.
There's difference in
On
beans
another-
and chicken and eggs.
In the garage.
Chicken and beans in the garage.
well, Mary and I talked
Yeah.
about that
So that you
too.
can really,
And the thing,
otherwise
yeah.
you get really, you
No,
get
you
your
go
eyes
crazy.
glazed over.
Yes,
totally
but I
agree.
think if you looked at those three things on one night, or, and maybe the next night, because the Broadway one wasn't, you look at the partly because the board has moved some on the Broadway thing. First, there was like really no recommendation, and then you talked about it, and you came to something that was a recommendation. So maybe you'd be able to do something else on the Broadway, like the garages. I was surprised by how much agreement there was on the use of garages. So maybe that wouldn't take a lot of discussion. So if you have a meeting where you talk about the Broadway and the garages, and if you've got time, you can spend on chickens and bees. And you might be, and then you do the Airbnb and B&B.
Yeah, yeah, so
and the
it's-
That
uses,
needs its
and
own
then with
night.
several other.
Clearly. That
Well,
needs
those
its
are
own night.
three things,
Yeah.
you know, and they intertwine. And then on a third night where you could do what's left.
right. I mean,
What'd you throw in with the Broadway? Sorry.
well, we had originally sketched out Broadway, garages,
Only because the garages is easy, I think.
right, and then the bees and chickens if you can get to it, yeah.
And goats.
And you may or may not.
Did you see
know,
one
not get
comment
to
said,
bees or
what's
chickens,
next,
but-
goats?
The other thing is we already have llamas on all this.
Llamas, llamas.
Back to get your deadline, right, Larry?
There's banging out on llamas.
Yeah.
But I think that, I had almost the same approach. I had it broken into 2 nights, because maybe I was a little optimistic. But
Yeah, no, you're not gonna do it.
Yeah, I don't think
We
so.
don't wanna-
Because you don't want to rush through it.
I had B&Bs, height of retaining walls, and then bees and chickens. I think it was 3 Bs, but then the Broadway corridor and garages. 2
Yeah.
Bs.
I think Broadway, even though the statistical results were very split, 30%, but I think like Mary Ann said, because you already spent a fair amount of time talking about the things that you were interested there
Right.
as a committee.
It's true.
It came from the working group, but it also came from you. And so I don't know that that's going to take all that long, which is why we look, I'm afraid to lump, well, I think the B&B and the Airbnb is
Keep it
a more full discussion, yeah,
We're
yeah.
gonna be going in circles.
That needs its own night.
Yeah, and,
It's just three separate, it's the three separate questionnaires, but also, why would you look at it statistically, the comments were all over the lot on Broadway?
the comments didn't bear it out.
Yeah, I mean, people maybe are down the middle on it, you know,
Right.
but the comments are all, I thought, very similar,
And
so.
we also have the letter from 106
Yeah.
that we probably need to talk about as
Yeah.
part of that.
Have to read it.
Broadway.
Well, they just consider that as another one of the survey things, yeah.
So say it again, so Broadway,
Broadway, garages, use of garages, and bees and chickens, if we can get to it.
Wait, did we? Oh, yeah, we
Okay.
got stuff on these.
Broadway garages and bees and chickens at
Yes.
one night, and
Then
then Airbnb.
B&B, Airbnb, that whole thing,
Airbnb, and,
use of,
using,
use of historic homes.
What are we doing with retaining walls?
Right,
That'd be
that's a
another-
whole night on retaining walls. No.
it's another note. Oh, my suggestion on the retaining wall, Pam, tell me if you agree with me. Since that's something that George Boyle has such strong feelings about, it might be useful to get his input. And
We'll get his
to,
input, but
well, to
I
invite-
didn't think it was that big an issue, really. I'm not,
Did you agree with Patty Steinstein?
yes.
That should be in your domain?
Yeah, I don't see that we should be regulating wall height, because I think it really depends on individual circumstances. Hey, George just approved, went along with an 8-foot wall in front of that house up on
Right.
Dearman Close.
Right.
So, you know, you have to,
Yeah, but-
I think you
but
have to look at,
maybe
well,
so, right,
yeah,
but
you have to
Pam,
look
right
at-
now, the recommendation in this comp plan document is that retaining walls be limited to 6.5 feet.
well, that's what I said,
So
that's
we
why
need
I
to
don't
just-
think that.
So you don't think George needs to be there?
I
I
don't
don't
think-
think too.
I
I
don't think
agree
it's
with you
appropriate.
completely. I think, case by case is the way to go there rather than have an overall regulation.
Did you,
I agree very much.
Well, that's,
So
We've
maybe
just
that won't
discussed
take
it.
long.
yeah, so it's a quick one, yeah.
retaining walls weren't covered?
Not my area.
Yes, retaining walls are covered. That's an issue.
No, Patty said they weren't coverage according to his.
I don't remember, and he didn't cite anything.
Well, they are
They
covered.
are covered.
No, were they
That's why I
always?
was-
No, they were not always.
Oh, you
That's
don't,
what he said.
you don't have to, you do not have to believe, well.
All right, let's skip over.
That's why we're asking, that's why we're asking the
Watch
question
the
now.
last
Is
planning
it
board
true?
meeting.
That's why
What?
we're asking the question now. Is it true that they didn't used to be and now they are?
I don't know if they
So-
didn't used to be, but they are now.
No, what the statement was if I remember, we can quote, we can look at, but anyways, it was that the
You redo it tonight.
ZBA said that retaining walls weren't buildings. That's what he
Yeah,
said.
there's gotta be some context to that
Yeah,
stuff.
I don't.
I mean, it sounds to me
He made
like
it global, but
somebody
that's.
taking a sentence out of something without putting it in context for one
Well,
reason.
you gotta
So,
It's more
consider
important.
the letter writer.
It's more probably they
Yeah,
consider
well,
structures, because structures
I
are
mean, there's some-
defined as the part of the coverage issue, so.
Actually,
So-
and retaining walls
Oddly,
may be
it's
less
building
important than a
that's
given
defined.
application.
But the structures are
Because
defined.
they were
here,
necessary.
too.
structure is defined as a building.
Well, I don't see the point of limiting.
Circular reason.
So do we
No,
need
but
a
building is
separate
any
night for
combination.
retaining walls?
Well, no,
No, no,
that's,
those can all go
I
on
would
the
just kill
third
that.
night.
I would kill that. I
So the
think-
third
I think
night is
that's
retaining
absolutely
walls,
right.
what
Kill
else?
retaining
What?
walls.
okay,
The third night is retaining walls and what else?
No,
We did it.
What did we just?
killing
We
retaining
just-
walls.
Well,
There's a
the
motion
other
on,
thing-
motion on the
There
table.
were 10 things that Larry
All right,
was
hold
doing.
on.
Wait,
Yeah, what
what
is
does
that?
that for?
well, I actually, I don't think I listed them all here.
Yeah, the Astor Rock DPW, that's what, because there were 10 altogether.
I know, but I didn't list them all.
One, two,
Just take it out. No, forget it. No, forget it.
five, 6, 7, 8.
I must have them here, yeah. All right, look, so wait, there's a couple of things going on here, so let's take a step back here. Okay, so the plan would be for meeting number 1 to be Broadway, garages, bees and chickens. Meeting number 2 would be B&B and Airbnb, as well as the use of historic homes for other things than being a home. And the third night would be basically all the rest of it, which I won't enumerate because I don't have them all listed in front of me, but it's going to be things like the use of the Astor Street lot, future of the DPW.
The fire station
The,
was on.
yeah, fire station was on there, the retaining walls, and I can't remember what the others
Have
are.
public input on all of those.
No, I'm still working on it, but by the time you all get to figure out a meeting schedule, I'll have the feedback.
Oh!
No, it's not yet.
No, we're good, we have, we.
Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday next week.
No, Listen,
Yeah, no,
I don't know when the
meetings-
meetings are gonna be, it's just that
Fifty
I'm out of the
weeks
country
right
from the 9th to the 17th of next month. And the fact that Mark and I did the Airbnb and B&B, I'd like it to not fall in that 10-day window if it's possible.
I'm also on vacation from the 14th to the 24th of October.
I'm gone next week, after Tuesday.
all right, so, I'm sorry, let me start. So Janice is 14th to the
I'm out
14th to the
to
24th?
the 20, we're coming back on Tuesday, so I'm available starting the 25th.
That's October.
October.
Okay,
Do you care about September?
sure.
After this weekend, I'm
Are you?
happy.
Yes.
I've gone September 20th to September 25th.
Okay, I'm sorry, Rick, I didn't hear you.
It's also October 9th through the 17th.
Yeah, we don't want to do it on the Jewish holidays,
This
please.
is next weekend's out, not next week's out.
All right, is there anyone else that's away that they know about?
I'm gonna be going the next 2 weeks, digging my house out in Georgia.
Oh, boy.
You hit
Well,
this?
I don't know yet, I can't get any information.
That's honestly a good sign.
That's right.
If we're pessimistic, I'm away in February.
But I'll be here, I'll be here the 25th and the 26th and
Of
Oh,
September?
September?
September, and during the day on the 27th. And then back the week of October 16th, which gives at least a couple of
I'm
days
gone,
or
I'm
so.
gone that week.
So you're gone 9/28 to October, what time is it?
Till October 16th. sorry.
16th, okay.
Well, we did have a okay, for what? We do have a meeting down for October 18th, so why don't we just leave that in there? That's one.
Yeah, that's Janice's way.
Oh, you're not there yet, oh, okay.
I'll plan for
First day back.
Yeah, that was.
I'll be jet lagging all over that meeting.
Now I have the 25th down as a CPC meeting,
Could be
October
such a good mood
25th.
draft rally.
but that doesn't work.
You have that, and that's
I
fine,
had
I've
that
got
as
the
the
18th.
18th.
I have
I have
the
the
18th as
18th.
well.
I have the
Not
18th,
We all have the
October
18th.
18th.
Yeah, October
Yeah.
18th, comp plan, third public.
That's right.
Yeah,
But I've got to.
Yeah, that was what we had,
Yeah,
yeah.
but that's not
that-
happening,
that's
so
all
it's
right.
fine, yeah.
so if
So-
somebody's missing, maybe they're just not missing the one that they're been most involved in, maybe there's a way to.
Yeah, I mean.
How about, well, okay. Oh, yeah, we didn't,
Yeah,
we could
The order
we could
is-
flip out the orders here, but.
right, you called it 1, 2, and 3, but maybe 2 and, well, you can figure that out.
Well, we
Like
can't really,
Rick
because
doesn't
we
wanna-
can't do the Airbnb and the other one, because we haven't done a
The-
survey on the historic.
Historic home ones, the survey's not back, it's
So the
drafted.
other one-
It's drafted,
Yeah.
it's ready to go.
That's why Broadway.
I didn't want to send it
Garage
too close to the previous
go
one.
first.
What is our, is there like an end point where we have to be done by a
No.
particular time?
I
Because I'm
don't
wondering if
think we
we're,
can
you
do
know, we now realize we need a bit more time to digest all of this stuff, and instead of trying to squeeze it into, you know, there's a lot of people away in September and October. If it goes a couple of weeks past, if we know we need 3 meetings, maybe you can do one of those wonderful meeting doodle thingies.
Okay, well,
You know when there's large.
we're kind of doing that now. I mean, so in other words, it looks like,
Well, everybody's here, when they.
yeah, it looks like it's safest to go after October 24th.
September, was there
I
September
thought
26th?
September 26th
26th.
was a good day.
Could we do the 26th?
September
Get one out of the
26th?
way?
Yes, it is.
September 20th, I'm back.
September 26th is.
We could get one of the 3 done.
Oh, what is,
It's a zoning board meeting in this room.
Right,
No,
yeah.
Oh, that's right.
Oh, there's a zoning board
But-
meeting.
What
We could
about
do
the
it during the day.
27th would be better, it's that drug and alcohol.
We
Yeah,
can't do
that's,
it.
you
have to speak.
Yeah, you have to speak.
How about the 25th? Is that?
don't drink it.
I'm not
You
sure.
can change that, but I'm.
I have ARB and I also have another meeting that I have to.
How embarrassing.
Well, I'm back by Monday night, I'm back.
Monday the 25th?
Yeah, Monday the 25th, I'm supposed to be
I can
back,
do that.
depending on.
Yeah, but that's an ARB meeting, yeah.
Yeah.
That happens.
Okay.
I'll do the best.
But
Thursday, the
fewer
28th,
meetings
that's
and
not good for you.
everything.
Yeah, exactly.
What was
No,
that?
the 28th, I'm
27th?
I'm fine on the
There's a
28th.
drug,
There's an ARB meeting that night.
No, I ask.
I
I
asked.
asked drug meeting.
So what about
at
the
schools.
28th?
Birthday
What's the
party.
28th?
What about the 28th?
7 o'clock.
Connie's
What
gone.
about-
No, no.
What-
No,
No, Bruce is
28th,
gone.
I'm all
It
right.
would be like the 27th at 5
Okay,
o'clock.
all right, I'll
Would
give
that
up
be
the
a
Woods Committee.
possibility?
Yeah, what about that? That's a good idea.
9:27.
The 27th, like at 5 o'clock?
What?
I can't.
You
do
might-
that. Sorry.
Or you can't? Okay.
I've got meetings from 6 o'clock on that night.
Okay.
But the
So,
28th,
The 28th
try,
is looking
try
better.
Thursday,
That is so easy.
September
Yes,
28th.
do something.
Larry,
Wait
Thursday,
until you hear what
September
you're gonna
28th.
settle, and then I can say no.
I think Bruce said he was gone.
Oh, but Bruce knows how to call my phone.
I do. They can even do face.
If he,
Oh, right, we can find a way to prop you up.
You want to try the 28th?
true.
Does he,
we're
but
not
Bruce wants to
ready
do,
for B&B.
no, but we could do chickens and garages.
We might be. I'm,
Okay, so the 28th, we're saying,
this is ready to go, so,
At what, 7 o'clock?
I mean, you only get comments the
Chickens,
first
bees, and
5
garages.
days.
Not necessarily related.
But does that work or no?
No,
Not really.
Then we-
Well, yeah,
We originally
I mean,
have already
it's
Chickens, bees, and garages.
Yeah,
Because I make plans.
I know.
And
Now, we already have October
Same
18th, right?
Chickens and bees is gonna be a lot.
I'm sorry, you're right.
Unless don't get stung.
And then we have,
I'll tell you,
Unless
yeah.
November
someone-
15th.
Who was it made a
What else do we
comment?
have, Larry? What are the?
Can I don't have them in front of me, only because I was expecting that they're
I
gonna
had
change.
November 8th down also.
Yeah, but a lot of those coincided with village board meetings or work sessions, so,
But the 8th does not. The 15th is a work session, but I have the 8th is just a comprehensive planning.
yeah, I don't remember.
Comp Plan Committee,
I just
Wednesday,
don't have it in front of
November
me.
8th.
Wednesday, November 8th?
So is the 28th out now?
No, the 20, we did,
That's it.
I had
28th,
a comp plan meeting on the 8th.
September 28th,
At
October
what
8th.
time? Can we just back up, at what time on the 28th now?
7.
7.
Okay, and.
Is that a problem for you, Mary Ann?
Yeah.
Oh, no. Oh, I don't want it to be a problem.
So does that help?
It's a problem for,
For Mary Ann?
I can come, but yeah, it is a problem. I have to cancel out somewhere. My friend was having her sister in from California and she wanted me to come for dinner, but I was with her.
And so we're doing Broadway that night too then with,
I
chickens?
guess, is that what we're gonna do?
About the Buckley chickens.
I'm hoping the chickens and garages isn't that long in
Do we
discussion.
need to get a third date now, or
Well,
I didn't even hear the second.
I
yeah,
didn't get a
October
second yet.
October
So-
what?
September 28th and
Right.
October 8th?
That's a Sunday.
No.
No, I'm sorry, November 8th.
Wow.
And will you send a confirmation out with which topics
There
we're
should
gonna
be
do?
one in
Yeah,
October.
sure.
Wait, could we do it the night of our work session in October?
That's what, that's a
October
Too much.
11th is a,
no, but only because,
October 11th I have as a Board of Trustees.
Correct.
Yeah.
October 11th is a work session. I don't know what stuff you're about.
well, I mean,
Bruce isn't gonna be
I'll
there
I'll be away too.
and Rick's not gonna be
all right, so that's out.
It's not a good
And then,
idea.
so the,
We have Astor back
October
potentially,
18th is
so.
gone?
there.
October 18th was gonna be a public meeting, but the public meeting's not
Oh,
happening.
we're taking that out.
Well, but there's some,
Well, there's just
Janice
Janice.
is away.
So if it's just me away and it had, then,
Is there anyone
We
of
want
the,
to have
I
a
mean,
public
like, do
meeting
you
before we
have,
have our ducks in a row.
I don't care that
No.
much about retaining
No, that's
walls.
out.
You cancel?
Right, but
okay,
So we'll
okay.
have this week.
Why don't we do the 18th, the oddball things like retaining walls and stuff like that? 'Cause she-
October 18th?
Yeah, and that way, if we haven't finished bees and chickens, whatever.
We'll have finished them.
And then November 8th will be this one, and that'll be the
And odds
B
and
and
ends.
B and Airbnb or whatever.
Oh, that's gonna be.
sorry, what was the,
You're good on November
what was
8th.
that final
I'm
one?
fine on
November
November
8th?
8th.
November 8th.
Also, we should check with Larry. The only little caveat I have there, Larry's not here tonight. He was the other person on the downtown section. If he also can't be there on October 18th, then that's.
I can't imagine, I mean, that, we had that down in the
Yeah, that was
calendar as
gonna
a
be a
meeting.
public meeting.
So,
Probably knows.
Yeah, you just, yeah.
He's probably
All right,
watching
so we're
what's
done.
going on.
All right, so-
What was the last, what was the last?
One of the two.
November 8th.
Louder.
November 8th?
It's already in there. It's already in there.
Yeah.
So that's Airbnb.
Yeah.
Yes.
And
Then
then,
we should be ready to
and then the 28th is gonna be Broadway and.
urgent care.
So are these, are internal discussions, or are there, is there public coming to these?
No,
They're,
it's all
they're,
workshops.
they're us discussing, okay.
Yeah, you got your public comments.
Or they-
survey.
Yeah.
I mean, they can come watch.
They can
Right,
come, yeah,
yes.
but I think the board just has to hammer this stuff out.
Okay.
I mean, we'll send letters, I guess, right?
Yeah, yeah.
People have comments.
More,
Yeah, I wouldn't think any comments that come in before then you should take into the mix, but.
Yeah, of course.
I mean, I've heard some people say, oh, I meant to do that, I meant to comment on, so I
Well, are the
suppose.
surveys are still open,
They're all
right?
still live, yeah, but I mean,
Yeah, they can just go.
Yeah.
the
Then
responses
would you
tail off.
know if new ones came in?
No, but I can go back and compare. It's no big deal.
Well, maybe
It's all,
not-
it's all date driven, so I can.
Right.
So just to be clear, the three are September 28th, and then October 18th, and November 8th,
Right.
right?
Yes.
Okay.
We got a lot of
And
hits
the, and the
happening.
topic on the 28th is Broadway,
You know, the
garages,
Chinese will not be
bees
happy
and
with that,
chickens.
because anything with an eight in
And
it
then,
is.
yes, and
Yes.
then on the 18th, it's, the wolves.
Retaining
It's all
wall,
the-
the
all the
on-wall
additional-
review, yeah,
And then the last one is the Airbnb and historic homes.
right,
Okay.
Airbnb.
Right. Okay.
Wow, we've accomplished something.
You've set up meetings.
No, but we've had everyone to agree to a schedule.
Yeah, no.
We almost had the,
Except Larry's not here.
the one,
Bobby, you said
the one issue
They'll have to agree.
But it's not, my guess, Ted, is it won't be an issue because, of these, a couple of these were dates that were already,
I will change my plan.
we had.
Can we just vote on retaining walls now?
I mean, I would say what Julie had, is there really anybody who thinks this ought to be a general rule from which the planning board or somebody's got to give permission to change it? I mean,
No,
there's a
I
guy who
know.
knows his best. And I sort of secondarily get your feedback, and I couldn't agree more that this ought to be case by case
Right.
situation instead of something decided across the
Yeah, it
board.
should be taken up at the site plan level.
I think the other thing was maybe that, I don't know where the 5 feet
This
came
whole
in.
committee recommended they be limited to 600, that's fine, but.
Well,
This is what-
I don't,
You can change your mind.
I don't have.
No, I mean,
We haven't come up with the
that's why you
comp plan
have to,
yet.
You have to do it in a.
Well, it was whatever, it wasn't, it was whatever group of the, whatever subcommittee was dealing with.
What, code modification?
no, but no, the whole group, they had to say whether they agreed or
So I
not.
Yeah,
can
let-
keep it on the list.
Well, it's gonna be on the list.
Yeah.
You'll be able to acknowledge that you received a certain level of feedback, and then you make a decision
Yeah,
after
because
that.
there might be more feedback before then.
Yeah.
Consistency is the hobgoblin of small minds.
Okay, thank you.
I forget.
Mark Twain. Mark Twain.
Right, so
When
we're
in
good.
doubt, Mark Twain.
Anything about the format or, you know? I think the last point about the comprehensive plan update is, and since you haven't had it in front of you, it may not be all that pertinent, but what I think we're going to try to do is make sure that the priority items, the items that are of most importance here that have a lot of different opinions and points of view, will have more real estate taken up in the plan than some of the lesser items. You know, a recommendation about charging stations. We don't need to go through all of the benefits of a charging station or, you know, opportunities and where they're going to go. We're just going to make a statement that says we're supportive of them, you know, do everything you can to support those. And that's it, period.
You
So,
ever enter that?
yeah, no. So, and so we're going to restructure. That's not the way it's currently structured.
I'm sorry. To help us do our homework, is it possible, I don't want to add like hours of work, but is it possible to resend the feedback that you've received, group the way we're going to address them? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah,
Could you
But
do
they
that?
were all in
they were all
emails.
separate. They were all separate
separate
emails.
emails.
Okay,
And they were within a few minutes of each other on the same day, I think.
Yeah,
okay.
I was on a
I sent them
roll.
all myself again.
I was on.
So your follow-up email to this might say, as we discussed on September 28th, these are the things.
I can reattach.
Right,
That's not a
okay,
problem. Sure.
Okay, right.
Yeah, but they were all sent as separate emails, so
Just to
And
make
then
it
there might
depending
be,
on how you
this was in the summer,
Just the what?
I think I missed something.
No,
Is it
it was an
really
attachment.
First one was 72 pages.
No, I can't.
You didn't,
You know
there was a
what?
big,
Do you mind if we,
Maybe,
No, I didn't.
okay, I
do
may
you
have
mind
missed
if we physically
Never
read
mind.
there
the
was a document that had, this is B&B feedback.
I'm just counting the
That's
trees.
one
There were a few times I didn't print out the chance.
I literally, I opened it, I printed it,
One
I saw
comment.
72 pages.
There's 144.
Oh, yeah, no,
That was
no,
that.
no, I didn't, because I didn't expect people
No.
to say that. It's not being specific and
It's
go
very
through
quick.
it.
half of.
you know what I'm gonna
We'll
do?
talk after.
If you
Well,
don't
this
mind,
time,
I'm
I
gonna
just
come in
got
and read
take
it
notes rather than
instead of reading it on
Maybe
the
it's too big.
In my planner.
No, it wasn't that
For
big.
her.
It wasn't that
That's
big.
in the spreadsheet.
No, that was the original one that I sent. Let me explain it to you after. Are we
I
done?
don't have the.
Can I say one
Yeah.
more thing? I mean, these issues you have identified that we're going to take up in these three meetings are, they're interesting, and obviously there are of interest to a lot of people who gave you feedback, so we've got a lot of reaction. But to me, the things that really matter are what I think Mary Ann mentioned earlier, the building, the fire station over here, and the DPW down below, and creating a parking space that makes sense, or development that makes sense. I mean, those are big issues that are going to help turn the village around.
Right.
And bees and chickens will affect, the environment, the overall feeling of people and that sort of thing, but it doesn't have the same impact.
Sure. So what we did at the beginning part of the summer, or sometime in July, I seem to recall, is we had some long conversations, Marianne and I did, about the idea that, there's these 50 recommendations that are all in this, 8-page document, and I think we owed it to the process to make sure that we get appropriate feedback for some of the more significant items. And so what...
Or not necessarily more significant,
Controversial items. Good, yeah, exactly. So what we recommended to do, and it was done through emails, I realized, in the middle of the summer, but what we recommended is we made suggestions about the 10 items that we thought were the most important and controversial. And we earmarked that around, and I don't think I got any feedback necessarily, so we started going forward with the gathering of feedback on what I call a very targeted basis. In other words, if you throw a 50-line document out there to the public and say, hey, what do you think? You're not going to get much back. People don't have the bandwidth for that. So what I've been trying to do, as you've seen, is send out individualized solicitations for these items, and that's the result that you got. And I think it's pretty good, actually.
Wait a minute, the Airbnb wasn't sent to everybody?
Yes, it was one.
Because I thought you said you just targeted who you sent it to, I'm sorry.
No, targeted in terms of.
No,
Oh,
took
so
the
the
topic and
survey
sent that out.
wasn't about all 50.
No, but there were different
Or even all 10.
I know on the retaining wall you sent it, and just so
Right.
you know, it wasn't like we said, what's the 10 most significant? We went through the list, and independently, which of these things do you think are controversial? And we came up with almost the exact same list, Larry and I independently.
I'm not criticizing you.
No, I just wanted to explain it. I think it's important. But here's what we did then. Once those 10 items were identified, I then went through and identified particular strategies for gathering feedback for each of the items. So, for example, for the bed and breakfast item, not only did everything went out through village email, that's the easy one.
Oh, okay.
But also, the emails went to specific neighborhood associations, the ones that we know about. I mean, it's not everyone was organized. We sent information directly to real estate agents, and we also posted on particular Airbnb hosts that we found. We direct messaged with Airbnb hosts that are in Irvington and advised them of the feed. So in other words, we did real targeted outreach. So when I say targeted, I mean everyone gets the email, but there's also other strategies.
That would be helpful for us to have,
What?
the list of who was targeted.
Okay. Yeah, I didn't follow through on every single one, there's
I
certain
think it would
ones.
be useful for us in reading the comments.
Sure,
That it
Because,
came
because
from,
it makes some sense to me now, because some of these things didn't sound like they would have all been from citizens I see, so some of them would have been from real estate agents. It would be helpful if they.
but I didn't design the survey in such a way that they revealed who they
Yeah,
are, so.
yeah, right, I know, but I know you didn't.
Right.
But it would be helpful to know
Sure.
who besides the residents got that.
Sure. And in the case of the retaining walls, that's an easy one. I
Yeah,
knew,
I can see that.
I've reached out to developers,
Not everybody knows about retaining walls.
Well, it was Bill,
I didn't
Chuck,
get
and
Yeah.
Patty that responded.
Yeah, so,
Good one from.
well, no, I mean, I thought I was using common sense, I thought.
Architect?
Um,
but the DPW and the fire station are
Have
yet
not been
to
done
be,
yet.
yes, yet to be sent out, so.
Correct.
Yeah,
You
maybe
don't have a
we
lot
said,
to work with.
and the truth is, I think on those, you may end up with, rather than a specific recommendation, is a process for dealing with those
Yeah,
problems.
We can't just
process.
come
As
to a
opposed-
conclusion
Right,
this year.
right, and that might be, but some of those other things, like B&B, to be sure, it's not as big a deal as there, but it is for, it's a day-to-day problem.
Understood.
Right. So anyway, that's how,
Avoid it coming to you guys.
that's how that came about.
Is it
So-
allowed or not?
No, I think it's, what you did
As long
was
as they don't
exactly right.
retain walls
You
all
can't, some things you can't have 10 people think through, I think.
Right.
Having the two of you independently figured out and then have targeted, that was exactly right.
Right.
And the comments that I read all the comments on the Airbnbs, and it was interesting.
Yeah, it really was.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I the whole thing. I mean, I was really surprised by the garage, the responses on the garage.
Yeah.
Everybody thinks it's just fine.
I read some of them on the train and I was laughing out loud. People were looking at me. I'm not gonna tell them to read the comprehensive plan.
Oh, you-
Odd sense of humor.
I haven't found anything to laugh about yet, but I'm sure I will.
Some of the comments were funny.
Yeah, I know.
All right, so that's,
Thank you for all you two
Okay,
have
you
done.
guys
Very
have to stay.
okay.
And we have an executive session.
No, not executive session, advice council.
Motion to adjourn.
I just started to so yeah,
Executive.